thank you very much for being here. This is the second time that I organize this tutorial, and the second time in my life that I organize a tutorial. I organized it before the EDOC conference in Groningen, and we have like 3 people attending it, so I'm very happy to see more faces here today, and thank you very much for coming. So, in this tutorial, we'll learn a little bit about FAIR, about the process of making data and other resources FAIR, that is FAIRification. And then we'll learn about a method that was created for supporting people on FAIRification planning. And we will use this method on a hands-on mock case scenario, which has a very interesting topic. Let me check just like it. Over my microphone. Alright, I will just take it off. Technicalities of being on TV. Feels like I'm in a TV show. These are the, let's say, planners of these tutorials. Unfortunately, Isadora could not be here today, and Luis is delayed because of trains of the Netherlands. And I am Cesar Benavé. I'm a PhD student here at the Leiden University Medical Center. I'm part of the biosemantics group, coordinated by Marco Ros, which probably most of you know. And I also have some helpers here today, Alberto, Inês, Bruna. You probably get to know them during the hands-on. Before I actually start, I would like to also get to know you better. So I'll ask you to join this Mentimeter. You can scan the QR code or just use this short URL. And while you do that, I'll try to switch the screens here. So first of all, I would like to know your background. This is more like to understand if most of you comes from biology field or from the bioinformatics. So for these questions, just like type your main background if you come from computer science. We already have 2 responses. 2 people are very fast. With 2 backgrounds, yes, correct. If you miss the URL, you can also go to menti.com and use the code on the screen to enter this room. Genetics, pharmacy. So what's your level of experience with FAIR and FAIRification? I'll ask the helpers to not respond to this, please. Let me move on to the next one. So what comes to your mind when you hear the buzzword, let's say, FAIR principles? So I have to say I'm happy with these answers because, well, although most of you said you're beginners in FAIR and FAIRification, you have a good perception of the FAIR principles. I feel a little bit annoyed when people say, for example, data quality. FAIR is not related to data quality. Yeah, the last one. What do you expect from today's workshop? Okay, some of you expect how to verify data in practice. I can already advance that we kind of not going to do that. We are going to plan how you verify data, but not going to do that in practice. Overview how data can be organized. Yes, clear steps on how to start verify my resource. I like this answer. Learn more about the FAIRification. You will learn more about FAIRification today. Yeah. Lots of good answers, and thank you for that. It's just that these questions are mostly for me to better adjust today's presentation. So it was really nice to get to know you a little bit better, to understand your background, to understand what you expect from today's workshop. And so today we will start with learning a little bit about FAIR and verification and some artifacts that can enable fairness in your resource. I would do that mostly because most of you said you're beginners in FAIR, so I want to level this room up to like the same level. So before we apply the planning method, and then we can learn about the method itself, and then we will have hands-on with the method on a mock case scenario. And this hands-on will be divided in 3 phases, let's say. So after we learn about FAIR and the method, I will explain the mock case scenario. It's a cute scenario, we like it. Some supporting artifacts, some that I will distribute in the room. I will explain the first 3 phases of the method. The method is organized in 7 phases. We will apply the first 3 phases on the mock case, then I explain phase 4. We apply phase 4 on the mock case. Before phase 4, we have a break. And after phase 4, we apply phase 5 and 6. And then I will invite you to respond to a questionnaire, because I'm a PhD student, and this method was developed in the context of my research. So if you want to help this poor PhD student, please respond to the questionnaire. It will help validating this method. So as I said, what we will learn today, a little bit about the benefits of having FAIR data, the FAIR principles themselves, the process of making data fair, that is the FAIRification, and a little bit about FAIRification workflows. I'll quickly mention some FAIR enabling software, such as the FAIR data point, standards that can be used during verification, and other related artifacts, and then also the method on verification planning, that is the goal plan method, and then we'll have hands-on application. What we will not learn today is how to realize FAIR. What I mean by that we will not be, for example, developing scripts to transform data into FAIR data or to publish your metadata. We will not learn how to use any specific software or tool, although we will quickly mention the FAIR data point. We will not learn on how to create conceptual models or ontologies, although I would love to teach about that as well. And we will not learn on how to assess the fairness of a current resource, although we will learn that the FAIRification objectives can be used for fairness assessment. So I also wanted to make it clear that there is no expectation that you become like experts on FAIR or on this planning method today. I just want to, I understand from the Mentimeter that we are all around here. Like, some of us don't know what we don't know, but we heard about FAIR. And I hope that today you hear about FAIR and you learn what it can do. So I will try to bring you from here to here, which is when you know what you don't know, what you cannot do now. Like, you have the okay, I can do this and that with FAIR, but you still don't know very well how to do that, but you know like the possibilities in your life. And I will start explaining about FAIR and verification by using an example of a project that I work for, which is the AGPRD program on rare diseases, which my colleagues also work for this project. And so the AGPRD aims at creating an effective rare diseases research ecosystem for progress, innovation, and for the benefit of everyone with a rare disease. One of the issues of rare diseases is that, as the name says, they are rare, and consequently, data about rare diseases is also rare, and hopefully in the future fair. And they are rare if you look at them in the context of a single country, like especially when you look in the context of small countries such as the Netherlands, Belgium, etc. But if put together, let's say at a European level, this data is of sufficient size and it can foster new discoveries, research, especially using the new all these new AI techniques that we have seen. And there is also the language barrier, the ambiguity of data terms, and this project aims at using FAIR to overcome all these barriers, because if data is made fair and standardized at a certain level, then instead of like moving data from one country to the other, which is not possible now because of different legislations, the algorithms can visit this data, and this data doesn't need to leave the source. So we will have much more information connected to make diseases, the research on rare diseases more amenable. Let me give you an example. Let's say we have a researcher in the Netherlands and she wants to, this is the current scenario, and this researcher wants to find more data for her on research on rare disease. So currently she'll have to, for example, contact her working colleagues across Europe, patient organizations, ask if they have this kind of data that she needs. Then she'll have to ask for permission to get a copy of the data. And when she gets a copy of the data, she'll have to, check it if it's in the correct format. Lots of problems that can happen in this process. And this can also take a lot of time, like sometimes weeks or months until, she finds the data and etc., etc. But anyways, let's say our research she preserves and she finds 2 data sets, one in Greece and one in the Czech Republic, that has the kind of information she needs. And when she gets the data, it looks like this. Of course, this is just a tiny example of how data can look like, but imagine like on a real case, you get like a data set with lots of headers in Greek or in Czech. If someone here speaks Greek or Czech, like I just translated this on Google, but I think they are correct. And now she'll have like to translate these headers and check the translation if she understood the headers correctly, and so on and so forth. Another thing that can take a lot of time. So imagine like since the beginning, the researcher now has spent like months in just trying to get access to the data before she actually can do her actual research. But let's imagine another scenario. Let's imagine the researcher now has the data magically made fair by the fairy. So the fairy, sorry for the bad joke, but I love this joke, transformed this data into fair data. It now uses ontologies. The fair data is connected to a central platform that informs the researcher which kind of data exists, which is the AGPRD virtual platform. There will be a workshop of this platform later today in the afternoon. And now the researcher can, like in hours maximum, get access to the data, through this platform, can interoperate the data using the ontology terms and so on and so forth. So now FAIR data like reduce the working time of this researcher like from months to hours, and she can actually spend time in her actual research. And we don't depend on the FAIRi anymore. So because we don't have the FAIRi as well in our real life, we need to learn about FAIR and methods to planning proper verification. Before we dive into the method, let me quickly go through the FAIR principles for those who are not aware of them. So FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. We probably heard that before. Findability is divided in 4 principles, and in summary, it says that principle F1, on principle F1, metadata is assigned a global, unique, and persistent, I don't remember what R stands for, identifier. F2 says that data is described with rich metadata. F3 says that metadata clearly and explicitly includes an identifier to data. And F4, that data and metadata are indexed by a search engine. The accessibility principle is divided in 2 principles, and the first principle is divided into 2 sub-principles. So A1 says that the data and metadata are retrievable by a standardized protocol. A1.1 says that this protocol is free, open, and universally implementable. A1.2 says that this protocol allows for authentication and authorization when necessary. And A3 says that metadata are accessible even when data is no longer available. The interoperability principle says that data and metadata uses a broadly applicable knowledge representation language. The data and metadata are described using FAIR vocabularies, and the data and metadata contains qualified references to other data and metadata. Finally, the last one, reusability principle, it contains 1 principle which is divided into 3 sub-principles, and it says that data and metadata are richly described, and to be richly described, it should include a clear usage license, detailed provenance, and it should meet community standards. These principles, they indirectly mention some artifacts. So for findability, they say, well, this unique identifier, and examples are the Perl, W3ID, DOI. By searchable resource, it can be understood like, for example, Bing, Google, PubMed, or any community-specific indexer. Communication protocols, the most common that we hear about are HTTP and FTP. Language for knowledge representation, examples are RDF and OWL. And vocabularies, ontologies preferably, or other controlled vocabularies, and they can be found at places such as Bioportal, Ontobia, and the Ontology Lookup Service. And reusability, when it mentions data usage license, examples are the Creative Commons, and for provenance, the DCAT vocabulary. There, an highlight from this supporting technology is a FAIR data point, because it contains a user interface that facilitates storing information about data sets, which is the definition of metadata, and it allows you to, let me show you user interface of the FAIR data point. So it allows you to manually input metadata such as license, language, when your data was issued, modify the themes, and it allows you to distribute it in the different knowledge representation languages. It contains a user interface, but it also contains a machine readable background interface. You don't need to understand this now. It's just for you to have an idea that both humans and computers can communicate with the FAIR data point. Lots of information, right? And this is also lots of information for me. And to deal with this amount of information about FAIR, some researchers, such as some people in this room, created the what it's called the FAIRification workflows. There are several workflows out there now. Some are tailored to a specific contexts, communities, I would say, like healthcare and so on and so forth. This is the generic FAIRification workflow, the first one to be published. And it is organized in 3 phases: pre-FAIRification, FAIRification, and post-FAIRification, and 7 steps: identification of FAIRification objectives, the analysis of data and metadata, the definition of semantic data and metadata models, step 5, which is to make the data metadata linkable, hosting of FAIR data, which includes the use of FAIR data point in most of the cases, and then assessment of the FAIR data against the FAIRification objectives. So as you can see in the arrows here, they're all dependent on the first one, identification of FAIRification objectives. And this can play a very important role in FAIRification because it defines how data is modeled, which stakeholders are used in the process, and so on and so forth. Let me give you an example on how different objectives can impact, for example, how data is defined. Let's say in that side that you have a biologist defining the concept of water. And one of the objectives of this biologist is to identify plankton concentrations in different areas of the Pacific Ocean. And on the other side, you have a chemist. And this chemist is also trying to define the concept of water, to model this concept in the FAIR data model, let's say. And this chemist has the objective to study the entropy of water molecules at different temperatures. So it's very clear from this example, they see the concept of water a little bit different. Like while the biologist sees it as a sample or as an ocean part, it can be a sample of a river or etc. So water as a sample. This the chemist sees it as a chemical compound, like water is a molecule composed of hydrogen and oxygen. And despite the impact on the data structure, the FAIRification objectives also impacts, as I said, the stakeholders, which are the people that will be involved in the FAIRification, but also those who will be reusing your FAIR data. Which resources are going to be made FAIR? Sometimes you have a resource that, to be valuable enough, needs to be augmented with other resources. If there are conflicts of interest or obstacles in your organization, like for example related to requirements, if you don't have sufficient money or time within infrastructure. And it also helps you defining specific tasks that you're going to execute during FAIRification. And to help you dealing with this very important step, that's why we developed the goal plan. So as I said, it was developed as part of my PhD work. It embeds my and my group's experience with projects such as the AGP-RD, the projects at LUMC and also at the University of Twente, training sessions that we organized several bring your own data workshops, also literature review, and as I said, because it's a method developed in the context of a PhD research, your feedback is very valuable. So if you want to if you have some suggestions during this workshop, or if you want to discuss during coffee break, feel free to reach out. And as I said, if you answered the questionnaire, I'll be very happy. So I'm already a little bit tired. You're probably tired of my voice as well. So far we learned a little bit about FAIR and about FAIRification, the problems with FAIRification, and now I will explain a little bit of the methods, just an overview. And yeah, so the method that I've been talking about, GoPlan, it's also organized in phases. These FAIR people, they like phases and steps. And these phases are also better described in steps. So let me see if I said something. Yeah, so we will now apply this method on a mock case scenario, as I said. So first, we will explain the mock case scenario, and then we will learn these three first phases and apply it on a hands-on. And the mock case scenario, sorry Bruna, it's based on the most beautiful and cute thing of the world, my dog. Bruna also has a dog, but it's the second most beautiful one. And our scenario involves an animal welfare organization, which is interested in increasing dog adoption in US states with low adoption rates. And they want to understand which dog characteristics have higher adoption rates than others. They also want to understand what the differences in dog adoption rates are across the US, what factors contribute to these differences, and so on and so forth. This organization currently collects data from local shelters and rescue groups, and they also make this data available to regional government agencies, which uses the data for zoonosis control, and they also send this data back to the local shelters, which uses the data from to identify potential adopters for the dog they have. The problem is, because of these different organizations that want to reuse the same data, this welfare organization, KAWOOF, I forgot to mention the name of it, it spends a lot of time and money collecting and curating data from all the local shelters and rescue organizations. And they would like to benefit from having FAIR data to support their work. So the organization has now asked for your help in creating a FAIRification plan for them, so they can verify their own data. During your FAIRification planning, you focus on two different data sets. The one, let me check. Yeah, one describes all dog breeds cataloged in the US, and the other describes dogs that are currently available for adoption in the US, currently in last year. You also have some supporting artifacts that you can use during your hands-on. You can access these artifacts by also scanning this QR code or checking the URL. But some of these artifacts I will also share with you I have them printed. I prefer to work on paper. I don't know about you, so if you prefer to do so as well. So yeah, it's a little bit not in the correct position because I have to convert it to another format, but I will share with you the template document for describing artifacts that you produce during the method, a description of the use case, and a description of similar projects that you can use to get like inspiration for your own verification objectives. In the end, I will share again the link to the questionnaire, just in case you want to. As I said, this hands-on will be organized in 3 rounds. So I will now explain the first 3 phases of the method. We'll have a round, we'll have a coffee break, yay, and then the 2 other rounds. So let me start by explaining the method finally. So it starts with a phase of verification preparation, and these activities can be executed together, like in parallel, I mean. And here is basically preparing for preparation, like how you prepare to start preparing for verification. And you will collect information that it's important for you defining the main goals of your verification. So firstly, you start by identifying the initial goals or business or research questions from the project idealization, because in real life, usually verification is part of a bigger project. And this bigger project also has an objective. So we identify that objective because that's probably what verification is trying to support. You also identify the initial group of related collaborators. Sometimes I say collaborators, sometimes I say stakeholders. I'm using them as synonyms. But all those people that are working in the verification project. That includes the domain expert, for example, a veterinarian consulting on your data model, but also FAIR experts or other stakeholders from your organization. You also define the main roles for these experts in your verification plan. So for this hands-on, we have the FAIR experts here, and I will ask you when we organize ourselves in groups to define like who will be the expert on the data, who will be the expert on the domain, and so on and so forth. You also identify the initial list of resources to be made fair. So for example, in our example, the 2 data sets, and you can say it yourself, like if you need more data sets to cover your research question. Also, you identify the initial fair supporting infrastructure. Like for example, in your organization, if you already has storage servers that can support storing your data, if you have data access controls that can be put in place to control access to your data, and so on and so forth. And you also identify initial requirements from the project idealization that can constrain verification. For example, time, budget, available expertise, so on and so forth. On phase 2, these 2 paths can also be executed in parallel. On one path, you assess the status of the resources to be made fair. Like, for example, if you have access to current storage servers, if you have firewalls to protect sensitive data, for example. And if you find any obstacle here, you have to address them before verification planning can continue. On the resource side, for example, on the data side, you check if for example, the data headers are understandable, if correct units of measurements are used in the data. Maybe we're integrating data that uses the metric system on one data set and the Imperial, the US system, on the other data set, and you also have to address these problems before continuing. You also have to need to assess the need for retrospective or de novo verification. I didn't cover this part, but we will be doing retrospective verification, which is when you already have fair data, and you transform it to data fair. That is the other case where you can create systems that will already collect the fair data, which is the ideal case. And finally, on phase 3, this is one of my favorite phases. We basically done this now with this lecture, but here is when you try to identify the knowledge gaps between the collaborators of your project. This is one thing that we identified in a project at the LUMC, that we had like the domain experts on one side and then FAIR experts on the other side, and they couldn't communicate well because they didn't understand each other's domain. And that led to wrong expectations. For example, medical doctors expecting a very robust and smart dashboard as an output of the FAIRification project, which is not usually the case. Like FAIR data facilitates this kind of software, but this is not usually the deliverable of such projects. So in this part, like you force each other to learn a little bit by the other's domain, like the domain experts learn a little bit about FAIR, which we are doing now with these slides, and the FAIR experts learn a little bit about the domain, which we also did when we were all hypnotized by my dog's picture. And yeah, these are the 3 first phases of the method that we will apply now. Before we organize ourselves in groups, let me just describe what we will get in these envelopes. So you get here some cards that mimic real-world situations. For example, well, local shelters do not have budget to acquire storage servers. So you have to think on a solution. And the cards are not the same. They are shuffled in different cards. And you also get a description of 2 related projects that you can use as let's say an inspiration for defining your own solutions. This will be mostly in the last 2 phases. The description of the FAIR principles. You get, oops, it's in the wrong side. The project proposal, how the animal welfare organization is describing the current project, how it understands it. So you see that, like, for example, they have the project scope, the activities they want to run. And this is not about the FAIR project, but the bigger project in which FAIR is included. And a template that you can use, because as you see here, you produce some artifacts during the FAIRification part, like the project-related goals, the list of collaborators, list of resources to be made FAIR, and these are all described in this template. And for this first part, you see here in the beginning of the template the description of the phases that they are related to. So we will just focus on phases 1 and 2. So yeah, time for hands-on. Let me slowly start with a recap, because I also see new faces after the break. Welcome. So in the first part of this tutorial, we learned a little bit about FAIR and FAIRification, which is the process of making data FAIR. We also discussed a little bit about FAIR enabling artifacts and software such as the FAIR data point. I explained the first 3 phases of the goal plane method for FAIRification planning, which is the main goal of this workshop, to teach you a little bit on FAIRification planning. We had a hands-on with a mock case scenario on a dog welfare organization that tries to increase dog adoption rates in the US through FAIR data. And yeah, we applied the first 3 phases of the method in this mock case scenario. Now I will explain phase 4 of the method, and we'll have some more time to go through the steps of phase 4. After that, I will explain phases 5 and 6, and then we have the last hands-on part of this tutorial. You see phase 4. Yeah. So this is one of my favorite phases because it really focuses on making your data reusable to others, but also on one of the things that I think it's very difficult in most of the projects that I have participated, which is to define the scope of your verification. So it starts by identifying and refining the domain of the scope, which is what is your data about, for example, or what is your resource to be made fair about, because as we know, you can make ontologies, software, and other things fair. Here, let's focus on data. So in our mock case scenario, for example, well, the data is about dogs being adopted in the US, and here it's recommended that you describe the domain in the most precise way as possible. For example, you will not include dogs that being adopted in Mexico or cats being adopted in Brazil as part of your domain, because you're focusing on dogs being adopted in the US. For that, it's recommended that you write a description of a domain, or that you describe this domain in a way that better fits your group. Like you can create slides defining it, you can write a word cloud or bullet points. I would suggest that for the sake of the time you focus on something quick, like defining the domain with bullet points or just keywords. And from this domain definition, you identify and refine what we call semantic types, which are keywords defining this domain. For example, dogs, other things like owner of the dog or the tutor, the organizations, the shelters, and stuff like that. After having that done, you would ideally validate it with domain experts if you define these keywords or these semantic types correctly, because it's also recommended that you define synonyms from these keywords. For example, well, owner can also be called a family or the adopter of the dog. And you use these keywords or this scope definition, let's say, to identify and refine possible reuse stakeholders. This is the best part, because when we make our resources or our data fair, we also have to think about those who will be reusing this resource, because the ultimate goal of FAIR is reusability, the last letter of the acronym. So you will try to think on possible types of stakeholders that will reuse your resource. For example, the government, other researchers, veterinarians that want to maybe release a product. And of course, it's not expected that you define every possible types of stakeholders that will reuse your FAIR data, because that's impossible. But at least this activity helps you like identifying the most obvious, the most prominent ones, and you can then prepare your FAIR data to be reused by those people as well. And by having this list of reuse stakeholders, you should also validate it with experts or with stakeholders of that community. But we will also skip this step because, well, we're just mimicking it. And yeah, and then we move to phase 5 and 6, which is the third part of this tutorial. So from the template, you see that you have specific parts for phase 4, and you just need to focus on that part as well. So this page here that starts with the title phase 4, very obvious. And yeah, we'll have around 40 minutes, given the delays, to go through this part. Okay, for those who just joined, I will put here a QR code that you can see some instructions on how to access this material, and also the description of the mock case scenario. But also your group can help you with that. I hope you had fun with phase 4. So a little bit of a recap. So far in the first 3 phases, we were more like, what do I have here? Checking like what's your organization situation, what is the status of the people that is going to work with you in this FAIR project, what's your data status. I think this is a bit annoying. And now you're basically on this phase trying to understand what you have, like how does my data look like, what is the domain of my project, what should be included as part of the concepts that respond to my research question, what should not be included, and so on and so forth. And now we move it into making it more amenable, I would say. So you have defined these semantic types, these keywords about your domain, and you have also defined the people that are going to reuse your data. And now you elaborate on these keywords, these semantic types, to create competency questions, that is, questions that these people, when reusing your data, or even the people in your project, will have when they look for your data, like which questions they want to answer when analyzing your data. That's why you also try to identify first these keywords, because they help you with elaborating the competency questions. One way to do so is to just think about the questions and then you assign them to different stakeholders, because different stakeholders can have the same question, but this question can be answered in different ways depending on the context of the stakeholder. For example, a researcher and the US government would like to know which ones are the most adopted breeds in California, but they would get different answers depending on their own objectives. And that's what you're going to do on step 5C, because you first identify the questions, assign to the reuse stakeholders, and then you go a little bit like a level up, and you ask why this person is asking this question. And then you understand you identify what's the goal behind the question. This will become the first FAIRification objective of this person in that context. And then you are suggested to align these goals to FAIR principles. Like, for example, in the case of, I have an example written here that I cannot remember. Like, if a researcher looks for what the most adopted breeds in California, as I said, a goal behind it will be, well, I have to collect data from shelters in New York to respond to my research question. And this is usually also done with experts, but in your case, you're also the expert in this subject. And then you relate these goals to FAIR principles by asking how making my data findable and interoperable and reusable and etc. will support this goal. But it's one question by principle, like how making my data findable will support this goal. Well, the researcher will be able to find the data set easier, and so on and so forth. And then you check that little leaf with the little piece of paper with the description of the related projects to see if they have solutions that you can reuse, for example, on making your data findable in the context of the researcher that wants to find data about shelters in California. Finally, on phase 6, you check all the goals you have against the constraints you identify in the beginning of the method, in the preparation phase. Because it might be that some goals cannot be prioritized now because of time and budget and available expertise. And for that, when you define the goals, a task that you can do that to support prioritization is to identify which tasks are necessary to, for example, make my dataset findable in the context of the researcher. And you estimate the cost and time needed for such task, and then you'll be able to compare them. When you have them prioritized, you chose the most appropriate solutions, like the ones that you can reuse, or ontologies that you want to reuse, for example, or if you want to create your own ontology. And you finally define the metadata for executing such task. For example, when you make your dataset findable for the researcher, which metadata concepts should be a model for the researcher. This we can skip, but ideally you would have to analyze in your organization to fulfill your goals if you need adaptations, for example, in the infrastructure, if domain experts need to be hired, if new storage servers need to be bought, for example, and you include them here. And at this point, you have an initial set of FAIRification objectives that, of course, in a real life would have to be refined over and over and validated with experts until you have your FAIRification plan, and you can use it as a source for your FAIRification implementation. And that's the end of the method. Now you have time, 45 minutes, to apply phases 5 and 6. Again, you can check the template. They're put together, and good luck. I'm really happy with how engaged you got with the method. I would like to use the last 20 minutes for wrapping up and give you some time to respond to the optional questionnaire that I will be really happy if you respond to it. So please consider it. No pressure. So I hope that in this morning you got an overview of the tutorial and of the method. Basically, the main idea here was to, with this method, was that we could grab your hand and say, well, you have to discuss about this, you have to discuss about that, you have to check this, you have to check that. Because as you could notice, I hope, preparation for FAIRification is also very important, and it takes a lot of time because, well, you were discussing here with groups, but we will have to discuss with lots of people inside a company or inside different organizations in projects, so on and so forth. So this takes a lot of time, and it has to be done carefully, because imagine, for example, if these objectives are wrongly elicited, then you have to go back and you have to review the standards you chose, the implementation solutions you chose, and this takes time and money, and people don't like when we waste time and money. So yeah, the idea behind the project is to basically guide you through this, and in hope that in the discussions you define the things that needs to be defined. And yeah, and ideally this will take more than just a morning, and you would have to go back and forth in the steps. You have to review your own decisions, discuss with lots of stakeholders, and the most important thing, to discuss with people outside of the community. I observed, for example, comparing these two groups with the tiny one there, that this the bigger groups that like were concerned with lots of other things that the other group didn't cover. So it's very important that you like prepare your project for those who are going to reuse your Fed data, but you also discuss all of these things with them. So I will make the slides available in the very same GitHub that I shared throughout this presentation. If you want to contact me to discuss some ideas or to complain about this, please feel free to do so, or also to reach out to me during the breaks and the lunchtime. And now I will kindly ask you to reply to the questionnaire, which can be accessed here. And you have like my dog begging you to do so. And yeah, thank you very much for participating. Thank you in advance for your responses to the questionnaire. And sorry if I fried your brain with this tutorial this morning. It was a lot. And I'm really happy with your participation. And I hope that you learned something today. Thank you.